one. Welcome back to the ImprovED podcast. My name's Justin Coffey, and you can find me on Twitter at Justin B. Coffey. And I'm a high school assistant principal at Ulysses High School. And my co-host, Jen Farr, cannot join us today. She has, family and stuff like that to take care of, I guess, so I'll let her off the hook. But Jennifer Farr is a 5th grade elementary teacher in Junction City, Kansas, and you can find her on Twitter at Jennifer M. Farr. I'm super excited today because, as you know, at the ImprovED podcast, we are all about pushing the evolution of education by talking to rock star teachers. And I happen to have a super rock star with us today. And so I'm happy to introduce Sydney. Sydney Jensen is a Georgia native, so you might catch a little accent in there. She's a 9th grade English teacher at Lincoln High School in the epicenter of America's heartland, Lincoln, Nebraska. What you might not know is Lincoln is one of the nation's top cities for refugees and resettlement, and students at Lincoln High speak more than 30 languages. Not exactly what you think of when you think of Lincoln, Nebraska, in the middle of the country. Jensen also serves as an instructional coach, working with new and veteran teachers to provide instructional support and mentorship. In recognition of her work in the classroom and her school community, Jensen is the 2019 Nebraska Teacher of the Year. Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
She is also a passionate advocate for increased mental and emotional wellness supports for both students and teachers who serve them. And I'm sure you've got a glimpse of, I know it's one of the things that brought my eye to Jensen, is she recorded her official TED Talk with on the impact of secondary traumatic stress and compassion fatigue on teachers who work with students experiencing trauma. Her TED Talk has already received, and I feel like you just recorded it, already received 1.4 million views. And so, Sydney, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I'm excited.
Well, one of the questions that we like to start off with is finding out what brought you into education. I know lots of people have a different path on when they decided they wanted to be a teacher, but can you talk a little bit about how you came to the profession?
Sure. So it's actually kind of a funny story. I originally went to college thinking I was going to be a pharmacist. I don't know how I figured that, since I can't add.
On that math stuff, it always gets in the way.
Yeah. And so, but I worked at a locally owned pharmacy when I was in high school, and I just really loved working there. And I was like, oh, I could do this. But I could not. And so I was in school at the University of Georgia and decided that I wanted to work at a summer camp. It seemed like it would be a fun way to spend the summer. And I have an uncle who, his whole high school and college career, he worked at summer camps. And as it happened, he married a girl that he worked at camp with, and she's from Iowa. They ended up living here in Nebraska, and he's actually a middle school social studies teacher, and in the summer was running the ropes course out at Camp Kitaki, which is about halfway between Lincoln and Omaha. And so he was down for Christmas to spend with family and was like, you should come work at this summer camp. And so I did. I just came to Nebraska not knowing anybody to work at a summer camp. And it was while working at camp, I was counseling this group of 10-year-old girls. And so there were about 12 of them. And one night we were walking to the shower house, and there's this pond just in the middle of camp. And there was a turtle next to the pond digging a hole to lay eggs in. And we thought it was the coolest thing we'd ever seen. And so we never did make it to the shower house. I'm sure their parents aren't thrilled about that. We actually ended up staying up late watching this mama turtle digging this hole. And we went to the camp library and found a book on turtles. And we were reading all about them. And it was just so much fun. I don't know anything about turtles, but it was so much fun to learn about turtles with those kids. And I got back to college, to my campus after that summer, and I changed my major to education. And I really just picked English because I was like, this is what I'm good at. So I feel like you should teach the thing that you're good at. And so I went to English education and kind of never looked back. And then, like, I don't know if I ever really felt like I was that good at school. And in my methods classes, that's where I felt like I really started to thrive. Like, my maiden name is Clark, and even my classmates in college called me Miss Clark because they were just like, you were born to be a teacher. You just have this teacher voice. And I don't know. So just, it felt like the moment I changed course and landed in that direction, everything just fell into place and felt right. And so I don't know how I didn't end up there sooner, but I'm glad that I eventually got around to the right course of action. I don't know.
That is such an awesome story. One of the things that I've talked about in the past and, still kind of hold this view in my heart is I wish that we almost flipped the way that we do teaching, or at least like college, because I wish that we could get like the student teaching done early, or at least get people in classrooms early so that they can have the experience like you had with those girls and that awesome turtle. And, it's hard when you have to do all the learning up front without the experience, and so that's one of the reasons why I get into project-based learning, is because I think you have to get your hands in there and get dirty, and then you can learn about some of the science or the things.
Yeah, absolutely. I really strongly believe in working at a summer camp if you want to be a teacher, because other than it's really formulated around that idea of project-based learning. Like so much of summer camp is that, and discovery-based, and like building independence in kids. But there's also like, if you do a sleepaway camp, there's a really cool thing that happens that helps with classroom management, which is like the first week of the summer when you've never done it before. It's like you are the conductor of the Hot Mess Express. And then week 2, you do some things a little better, And so maybe it doesn't come off the tracks until like Wednesday, And, and then the next week you do a little better and a little better and you have 10 weeks to figure out like, how do I set myself up for success in the beginning so that I get to like reap the rewards of that throughout the whole week? And how do I build community quickly with kids? And that translates directly over into the classroom. And I think that's one of the biggest things that brand new teachers struggle with, is balancing grace and accountability and consistency and all those things that make classroom management work. And summer camp is really good at teaching that. So
that is such great advice.
Work at a summer camp.
That is such great advice, and so stinking true. I think you're right. One of the things that helped me with classroom management as a teacher, which I was not my strong point, I can tell you that. But what helped me is that a lot of my classes were only a quarter long. And so at the end of the quarter, I got to restart. And just like you were talking about with summer camp, okay, that didn't go so well. Let's try something different. And then, I had kind of 4 chances in one school year to lay the foundation. So it helped me learn how to handle that. You're right. Okay, the elephant in the room. I want to talk about this whole TED Talk experience.
Yeah.
Because that was such an incredible TED Talk. So I want to hear
Thank you for saying that.
Oh, it was so good. So good. I shared it as soon as I saw it on my social media, and I had so many teachers reaching out to me say, oh my gosh, that is amazing. You need to get her on the podcast. And I totally agree. It's really, really good. I think teachers around the country were just saying amen over and over again. So can you talk about that experience? Like, what was it like preparing for that? What was it like giving that speech? Talk to me about it.
It was wild, man. So it's been something that's been kind of heavy on my heart for a long time. And then when the opportunity presented itself to submit a proposal to TED, I felt like I had to do it. I feel so strongly about it. And then, putting together my proposal was a labor of love. I think it was worth hundreds of hours of therapy, to be honest. And so the way that I did it, honestly, I'm an English teacher. I like to write, but I couldn't sit down and write it. And so I did voice to text. And I turned on voice to text on my computer, and I just talked out loud about like everything that I was feeling. It was like after one of those, just you come home at the end of a week and you're like, how how am I doing this? Just feeling so weighed down by so many things that our students carry with them every day. And I just talked out loud in my living room, and my computer wrote it all for me. And that was great. And then I didn't look at it for like a week, and came back to it and read over it. And I felt like I had somehow, some way really captured the things that I was feeling. And then it was just a matter of, submitting it. And so I submitted the proposal, and then worked with these coaches at TED, and they really helped bring out like more vulnerability, because I'll tell you, they posted it and it came out, we get out of school at 3:05. It came out at 3:00. And the bell rang, my kids went home, and I drove all the way to my house. Actually, I had to lead a training after school for an hour. So I was leading something. I didn't look at it. And so I get home. It's like 2 hours after it's been released at that point. And I sat in my living room with all the lights off with my dog. And it's just like, now I'm going to try and listen to this. And I couldn't. I just couldn't. I don't know. I was there. I know what I said. It's one of those things where I just, in the aftermath of it, it's like, oh gosh, I'm feeling really exposed right now. Yeah. And you don't know how people will take it. And I know the internet can be a very harsh place.
This is true.
And so it's meant a lot to me that so many people have reached out to say that it meant something to them, that they felt something, that it resonated. But at the same time, it's like bittersweet. Because as painful as it is, and as much as I know that there are other people in my building who have experienced these same things, we're all in it together as a community, there's still that like twinge of hope that other buildings aren't feeling this way, that other places aren't feeling this way. Teachers in other schools, states, districts, they're not going home every day and feeling this weight. And so to hear that they are, it's comforting to not be alone, but it's also tragic that so many places aren't offering the level of support that I think teachers need.
Yeah. Well, one thing is for sure, especially here in the last, 5 years or so, we've been talking about the need for social emotional learning in our students and support for our students' mental health. And again, I think you say it in the TED Talk, how important that is for our students. But the thing that kind of gets left out, as you point out, is the support that we need for our teachers. And so that kind of secondhand trauma that teachers experience through their students is, you're right, it weighs heavy on teachers. And I think so many of us go home at night with that weight, thinking about our students and, gosh, what are they doing right now? For and, sure. So one of the things you talked about, I don't want to turn this into like the saddest podcast ever, but one of the things you talk about is losing a couple students to suicide. And the high school where I was teaching at previously, we had a terrible string of student suicides. And I think in one school year, 6 or 7, I think we lost in 1 year. And so as a teacher, it's one of the worst, hardest things to experience, the loss of a student, particularly to suicide. And it's hard to heal from that. And so, in the TED Talk, you talk about advocating for mental health professionals and things like that. Can you talk about some other things that we can do as teachers to help support each other or help get support for teachers who are experiencing this?
For sure. First, I kind of want to tell a story. This just happened.
Yeah.
But I think it's really cool. So we just rewrote our 9th grade English curriculum. We updated it with just some newer texts. We added in lit circles, choice novels, and the 2 books that we're using for our lit circles this semester, actually, we intentionally chose a theme of mental health. And so we're reading All That I Can Fix, and gosh, the name escapes me. It is by Crystal Chan. And then The Memory of Light, and I can't remember that author's name, Francisco Stork, I think. And both of those books start off with suicide. In one, it's that the main character's father has attempted suicide. In the other, it's the main character herself has attempted suicide. And we actually lost a student over the break to suicide. And we had this really intense conversation of, do we move forward with these book selections? We were supposed to start them this week. Do we rearrange things? Do we push it so that it's a little further removed from this very real pain that our students are feeling? Because it was a 9th grader that we lost. And we brought in our school psych, and she is just the bomb. Like, she's so great. And she heard us out. We talked about the books, the context of it. And she said, I think what better time than right now to be having this conversation with kids. And she put together this whole presentation and gave it to all of our classes to sort of facilitate this conversation surrounding mental health. And it was really powerful for our kids. And I think what a great attitude to have, to say, like, we're not going to shy away from these conversations that need to happen. We're going to have them when they most need to happen.
Yeah. And
so I love that our school is looking at things that way and approaching it that way. As far as for teachers, I think, it's such a hard question to answer, because if I'm being really honest, I think it takes money. Mm-hmm. And to be able to have that sort of money, especially for smaller districts, it's got to be like an act of the federal government. It's got to be our Department of Ed saying, we value teachers. We know that teachers are leaving, 3 to 5 years into their career. And a big part of it has to do with this issue of secondary trauma. But research has to be conducted for money to be allocated to that. And there's a bill that's been sitting in Congress for years. I'm trying to remember, I linked it in the TED Talk. And so if you go to the TED page, it actually comes up. But it's the Teacher Health and Wellness Act. And it's really frustrating, because all that act does is allocate money towards research on secondary trauma. It's HR 2544.
Awesome.
But
we'll link it to this podcast too. Thank you.
Perfect. Yeah. But it's been sitting stagnant since like 2017, which is really frustrating. And so I just think more research has to be done so that those steps can be made. Because when I think of Lincoln Public Schools, like, we're a huge district. We have over 40,000 kids. And so there's a little bit more capacity there to be able to have more, even if it's district-wide support professionals. But when I think of, smaller towns like where I grew up in Eatonton, Georgia, it would be really hard, not only for them to finance those people, but to find them in the vicinity.
Yeah.
When you think of those more rural communities. And so for the time being, it's really got to be a grassroots thing of coming together as a school community, and making that effort to connect with each other, to support each other. I don't know.
Well, and I don't, talking about how it takes money, I think is good. I think we need to stop being silent about our needs as teachers and start demanding some action and some funds to support us in this way. So
and it's one of those things we tend to shy away from as teachers, because we're public servants. But to be able to do that service, there are certain needs that have to be met. And I think, like, that's the elephant in the room, is to say, like, there has to be money allocated to this if it's going to work.
Yeah, I agree. Another thing that you talk about in the TED Talk is that education is changing.
Yeah.
And, it's important that we teach our kids these, I'll call them soft skills, whatever you want, 21st century skills, whatever you want to call them. But more than just straight content, but how to be a good citizen, how to persevere, all of those kinds of things. So let me ask you this. Knowing that education is changing, where do you see education going, and what do we need to do then as educators to fit the needs of our students? That's kind of a big question.
It is a big question. It is a big question. And I think you kind of said it right there. We have to fit the needs of our students. And so like we have to recognize that, you know, our students aren't just numbers on a roster, they're human beings, and they all have such different needs that need to be met. We need more focused learning where it's preparing students for actual like careers that they are looking towards. A lot of districts are coming out with sort of career academy type situations, and I think that's really neat, doing that cross-curricular study. But also I think like using the content as a vessel for learning those things like communication, collaboration, gratitude, empathy. Those are the things that are universal, whether they end up working in, you know, a corporate job in Chicago, or if they're working overseas in a totally different country doing something else. Like all of that translates. How are you able to relate to people, to show people that you're listening to them, and to work with people who are different from you? That's going to become like the resume builder of the future. It's not how compliant you are. It's not, you know, did you get a perfect score on the ACT? Even the major colleges, you know, highbrow colleges here in the United States are starting to say, we don't care what you made on a standardized test. We care that you're a decent human being, that you've learned, you know, how to work with other people. And so, I mean, in my classroom, one of the things that we do is we do really intentional gratitude practice.
Yeah.
And so pre-planning questions to get kids talking to each other and turning and discussing. But then at the end of it, turn to your partner and say, thank you for sharing that with me. You know, and at first, at the beginning of the year, they do it a little tongue in cheek. Thank you for sharing that with me. You know, like, because they're uncomfortable.
Teenagers, no.
And that makes sense. Yeah. But the root of it is like a level of discomfort because they've never learned that skill or practiced that skill on purpose. And then by the end of the year, it's really like authentic and genuine. They're like, thank you for learning with me. You're so insightful. I really appreciate you sharing that. And I don't know, it just builds that capacity to hype each other up. And that's such a good counter to the level of putting down that can become so normal in a high school setting, especially. I don't know. It's just that community building piece, because so many people, and I disagree with this notion, but there are so many people who feel like social media and technology is like tearing us apart and making everyone incapable of socializing and having conversations. I disagree with that. I think kids are communicating more than ever before with their peers. It just looks different. Yeah. And so that makes it all the more important that in the classroom we're teaching them those face-to-face social skills, because we have a lot to learn as adults about those online social skills. They've got that covered. Yeah. But it's those face-to-face ones that are so important that maybe they're not getting as much exposure as previous generations. And like anything else, it really comes down to teachers and school to make sure that they have those skills going forward. Yes. I love that. I've heard teachers say, well, I stopped having my students present because they're so bad at it. And, you know, like, and I just want to say that's the exact reason why we need to have them do that. Yeah. The fact that they're bad at it is a perfect example of why we need to do it. So, I mean, that's just kind of a generic thing about presenting, but I think there's lots of things where we kind of say, oh, our students aren't good at this, but then we're not offering them any opportunities to practice getting better. Right. We're not coaching them through that. And so I like that you talked about that. And modeling it. I don't know. My second year teaching, I went to a professional development being led by a guy here in our district who I really respect. And he retired a few years ago, but he said, nothing drives me crazier than teachers who assign writing, but they don't teach writing. And I was like, amen, David Smith. And it's the same thing there. It's like, don't just assign a presentation. Teach how to present. Yes. You got to teach them the skills and model it. Otherwise, you've got to expect it to be bad. They don't know. Right. Yeah. How would they know? Yeah. And so it's one of those things that really resonated is like, if you want them to do something well, you have to teach them to do it, not just assign it.
That's so awesome. So you mentioned technology and social media and all of those kinds of things. Can you talk about some ways that you incorporate technology into your classroom?
Sure. So our district went 1-to-1 on Chromebooks, 3 years ago. Our senior class is the last class that came in as freshmen without a Chromebook in their hand. But I actually piloted Chromebooks that year. And so for those who are in my class, they've had them basically their entire high school experience. And so those first few years were a real hot mess of trying to adjust and see what works and update, broadband to make sure that it could handle the capacity. And so it's been a real learning curve for us, and I imagine for a lot of schools across the country who are incorporating more and more technology. One of the big ones is Google Classroom, creating this online community for everyone. It's really fun for us to take turns posting things. At first I put a real lockdown on that, and I was the only, it's like only the teacher can post things.
Yeah.
And gradually I've moved away from that. And again, it's about teaching kids that appropriate use. And so I think at first it was like, oh, I'll leave this on and see who notices. And then of course someone post something silly and goofy and I turn it off, and I don't know. So it's neat to talk about, here are appropriate things that you might post. If you find a cool article, if you see something that relates to what we're learning in class, like throw it out there for everybody. And so I think that's a really cool piece. We use all the little tech tools, that kind of stuff. We'll do GimKit, and that's really fun when we're, going over Odyssey vocabulary and stuff like that. But the biggest thing I think is just like, they have at their fingertips access to follow their curiosity. And that's where learning gets really fun. Like as an adult, when I fall down that rabbit hole and go from one thing to another, I think that is so cool. I don't know. My husband will like ask me what I'm doing, and I'm like, I'll have so many tabs open of different art. I tell him I'm just reading the internet because I don't know how to answer it. I'm reading the whole internet. The whole thing is open. I don't know. But it's cool. We use Hapara, and that's a cool feature just to be able to see what kids are doing on their screen. It's a monitoring tool, but it's really fun to watch them on Hapara when you've just said something and a kid Googles something that you mentioned. And I think that's the coolest thing is like, I could tell you what this means, but it's way more fun that you caught on to it and were interested in it. And now you have a thing right there in your hand that you can use to find out more about it. And I love that.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not super into like the gimmicky stuff with technology. My kids used to love Kahoot. I think they're played out on Kahoot these days. We don't do all Kahooted out. Yeah, they're all Kahooted out now. They love Pear Deck because we can do some really fun things with Pear Deck, doing little like polls in the middle of class. They love the drawing feature and being able to like draw visual representation of our learning. And so that's really cool. And I don't know, the biggest thing too is just being able to make sure that every single person in the room has an opportunity to share their thinking. And that pre-Chromebook was very hard because it's like, take out a piece of notebook paper and write a response to this. But it's hard for me to get around to everybody to see if we're all in the same course of thinking, to see, and I think about like my introverted students who are so unlikely to raise their hand in front of the whole room. But if they are typing out an awesome response on Pear Deck, all I have to do is like star it and I can throw it up there, and it's anonymous. And so nobody knows that it was this kid that wrote it, but everybody's sitting there going, oh my gosh, that's so good. Who wrote that? And they get to sit there basking in that glory, and it's nobody else's business.
Yeah.
And so I don't know. I love that it makes
awesome.
it so easy to hype up the introverts in a way that they still have their comfort.
Yeah. So one of the things I used to do, what you're talking about, so many of these things that you're using with technology are about building community. And all of my students had blogs, and so they all wrote blogs, and really they were their own blogs to write whatever they wanted about. But every once in a while I'd have them write about the project they were doing in algebra. But to practice, we wrote paper blogs at first, and it sounds so dorky, but we made it a template where it looked like a blog page, and they could draw pictures and everything. And so they wrote out a blog by hand, and then each of my kids got like 3 sticky notes, and they went around the room so they could comment on each other's blogs. And we just had some really good conversations because, like you were saying about your TED Talk, the internet is a mean and nasty place so much of the time. And so we just talked about that and what those comments do to people. And would you say that to someone's face? Probably not, but it's really easy to say it through the internet. So we write out our comments on sticky notes and talk about what a healthy comment is, or it's okay to be critical in your comments, but you don't have to be mean and nasty and use some of the language that's out there. So when you're talking about all these ways that you're using technology, and they all kind of tie back to building this community, one of the things, again, that from your TED Talk that you talked about was this community. I think when I was teaching, I thought, hey, all of these kids are the same age and they're all in class together, so they must all know each other or talk to each other or something like that. And so it took me quite a while to realize, you know what? Actually, no, none of them are talking to each other. None of them, like, there is no community. So what, besides some of those technology things, which are great, by the way, I love that you're thinking of your introverts. That was me as a student. So what are some things that teachers can do if maybe a new teacher is in here thinking about how they can build community in their classroom? What advice would you give a teacher to start building that community?
Sure. I think that community building has to be like the soul of your classroom. One of the new things, kind of buzzwordy type things right now is like restorative practices. The thing about restorative practices and like doing connection circles and things like that is like, you can't restore something that didn't exist to begin with. And so if you don't make the community factor exist, then when things fall apart, it's much harder to put them back together. And so for me, like, the community piece starts day one, and it's kind of like, I feel like I have to be the conductor of it. I always gave my kids like a first day of school survey, and it wasn't until like my 3rd or 4th year in that I realized what a joke it was. I don't know if other people can relate to that. But kids come the first day and you spend so much time going over, here are the expectations, here's like the syllabus, what we're going to do this semester. Okay, I have 10 more minutes, here's a survey to take up time. And like, that's the honest truth. And then, you have good intentions, of course. You let it sit on your desk for a solid 2 weeks before you recycle it because you care for the earth. But yeah. And
have you been watching my classroom or what's going on there?
I mean, I think about myself in like middle and high school and even college. And it was like, okay, these people are giving me this survey. I could write any crazy thing on here. They're never going to look at it. It's just going to end up in the trash can, in a week or two. And then a friend of mine recommended this book, Fires in the Bathroom. It's kind of dated at this point. I think it came out like kind of early 2000s. But it was this chapter about first day of school surveys. And what these authors had done is they had talked to all these kids in like Brooklyn, New York, to say like, what do you wish your teacher had known about you on the first day of school? And from those responses, they developed what they feel like is the perfect first day of school survey. And it has questions on it that, I don't know, I just never would have thought about. And so it's things like, when you do something really well, who do you want me to tell? And you make assumptions that it's just like their parent, whoever's listed, on their contact stuff. And that's not it for a lot of kids. A lot of kids, it's like a teacher that they had 3 years ago, or a coach, a cousin, like, I don't know, just
interesting.
People I never would have considered. And I think it matters to know that about kids. Other questions, it was like, is your house quiet when it's time to go to bed at night? And that's powerful to like, it gives you kind of a lot of information about their home life based on the answers to these questions. And, yeah. And so now I give that survey and I've added some questions and tweaked some things, but it's also like sort of sprinkled with get to know you questions, the standard icebreakers, you know, like, do you play any sports? What activities are you interested in? You know, what's your favorite thing to read? What do you like to do on the weekends? What do you do after school? And then I use it the second day of school to take attendance. So I go through and I just like pick one fact that I feel like they'd probably be cool sharing with everyone, you know, something kind of basic. And you use it to take attendance. And so it's, you know, it's things like Devin Orris, who loves Bob Marley. And what's so funny is that you say it and like, I can like picture it in my head. They like sit up real quick and are like, how did you know that? You wrote it on your survey yesterday.
Oh my goodness.
And they're like, you read that? The shock on their faces is like kind of heartbreaking because they fill it out thinking no one's ever going to look at this. It's not a big deal. But when you do the thing where you show them, I'm going to read everything you ever write and hand to me, I think like that speaks volumes about the community you're trying to build. And it just shows like, I'm paying attention to you and I want to get to know you. And that's important to me.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I think community building is in those little moments.
Yeah.
You know?
That's so awesome.
Yeah. Standing at the door and asking how their weekend was as they come in and then actually like listening, you know?
Yeah. Well, that's so true. And I think that's really good advice. I think there are lots of teachers who have the very, very best intentions and they want to do some of these things, but they're not exactly sure like what step to take or some real action that they can take. So that's really good advice. I appreciate that. Another thing, in Kansas, we're doing this school redesign. And so we are working right now, gosh, I don't know what percentage of the schools, but it's kind of voluntary right now where schools can jump in and redesign their school. And what I mean by that is they do a needs assessment of the community and try and get as much community input and voice as possible. And then they think about if we could start school all over again, like start from scratch. If we were to bulldoze this school and just start all over from scratch, how would we redesign our school? What would be different about our school? And so they're looking at all kinds of things, grading practices, course offerings, start times, just lots of different things to reimagine what school could look like or should look like. Yeah. So I guess if, heaven forbid, I hope this doesn't happen, but if a tornado came and wiped out Lincoln High, that's a bad example. That happens in Kansas here every once in a while. So,
right, yeah. No, it seems very scary.
But if you had to start a school all over, what's something that you might consider looking at or changing differently if you were to
the first thing getting pitched out the window are grades. I hate grades. I just think they're arbitrary. Yeah. I don't know. We've been having a lot of conversations about grades and grading practices at Lincoln High recently, and I think like it's awesome that we're having. Yeah, it's so important to be talking about those things. And one of the big factors in it is like at some point we've decided that a 60% is passing, and you know we look at grades in the grade book, and these are in reality, especially in an English class where it's so subjective. You know, like. We have rubrics, but there's still some, you know, the way that I grade something on a rubric might be different, you know, slightly varied from what another teacher decides because we have wording like, you know, whether or not grammar and convention errors were distracting. And it's like, well, gosh, what distracts me might not bother you at all, you know? Yeah. And so it is so subjective. And so we think about grades and it's like, you know, in reality, this is just a number I decided. And what does that even mean? And so I just think it'd be so cool if we could get to a place, you know, not just at Lincoln High, not just in LPS, but everywhere where we decide that like grades aren't the goal and the goal is like mastery and achievement of of a thing, a task, you know, like
Yes.
when we think about
Yes.
project-based learning, it's like, we're going to design this thing and we're going to like bring in math skills and writing skills and, you know, design skills, and we're going to create this thing that then we're going to be able to pitch to the public or bring to the community. And then the achievement is in that, like, yes, we did it, rather than you got a 3 out of 4 on the rubric. I don't know.
Yes.
I don't know. Grades are so inauthentic compared to the quote unquote real world.
They are. And this is what I did. My work on my master's was studying is grading practices. And I think what we think of when we're teaching and in the moment and when we're assigning grades, I think that we believe we're giving feedback about where a student could improve or not improve. But the truth is that is not good feedback.
No.
To put a B on a page, that does not help a student understand where their strengths are, where their weaknesses are. And we try and leave notes and things like that. But I think what helps students grow is specific feedback.
For sure. Yeah. And I think grades get into this like really sketchy equity position.
Oh man.
Because I don't know, like we're constantly sort of having this debate within our PLC as well. I don't assign reading at home. That's just like something that it's the anthill I'm willing to die on, I guess. Because I know from my relationships with my students that not everybody is going home to the same circumstances. You know, if 25 of my kids are going home to a place where, you know, it's suited to academia, there's heat, there's lights, there's a quiet place for them to work, that's comfortable and clean, and they have food in their bellies, but 2 of them don't, then like, we're not doing that. I'm not going to tell you need to read 20 pages tonight, because that is inequitable for my students who don't go home to those same circumstances. And it's interesting how uncomfortable that can make people.
Yeah. Well, I can tell you, I witnessed this one time where a teacher gave two different students failing grades. And one of those students, their parents came in and argued and made a case, and that grade got changed. The other student didn't have a family that would do that. Like they just weren't that assertive or weren't that comfortable coming to school. And so that grade was left. And again, that's just an equity thing where we have different cultures and different values, and we're willing to change the grade based on one culture and not for the other. It's shady.
Yeah. And it's, when grades are being somewhat decided by those circumstances that are outside of kids' control, we as teachers are empowered to like actively work against that inequity. And if we don't, then we're continuing to serve that educational gap. And that to me is just the reality of it.
Man, amen. I'm with you. That's what I would change about my school too. Grades. Okay. Last question here, and this is in honor of my friend Jennifer Farr, because I'm really good at asking these kind of like big idea questions.
Okay.
And she is so good at asking like, okay, enough with that fluffy stuff. Like, what are some action steps I can take? So one of her favorite questions to ask is, if we have a teacher listening to this podcast tonight, what advice or what things do you think that they could do tomorrow? Like, what's a for sure thing that they could walk in tomorrow and start changing their practice? What advice would you give for a teacher who wants to make some changes, wants to improve their teaching? What's some action steps that they could start taking tomorrow?
Get out of your classroom during your plan time and go watch other people teach.
Man.
Every chance you get. The biggest growth for myself, I'm an English teacher. I get very in my own head. I journal every day. I love to be reflective. And I've been journaling every day since I was in 8th grade.
Oh my gosh.
But the biggest growth that I've had as a teacher is when I finally stepped outside my own classroom. I stopped closing the door. I started inviting other people in, which is very scary.
It's very scary. It's
very scary. So if you're a first-year teacher, do not feel bad about not inviting people in. Like, you've got to get comfortable. And like, I mean, even now, and I feel like I've been very affirmed as a teacher, which is so great. And I want that for everyone. But even now, my principal walks in the door to watch me teach, and I immediately start sweating. Like, it's anxiety inducing. But it's a lot less stressful to go next door and watch someone else teach. Whether it's the same grade level or subject area or not, being able to observe other people now that you're in a classroom and you have your own students and you're looking at it through that different lens and perspective, that's the thing. But even more so is adding on to that a conversation with that teacher afterwards to say, like, why did you do it this way? What were you thinking when you did this? Because that to me, like, led to so much deep thinking about why we do what we do the way that we do it. And so I started just like inviting myself right on in to my neighbor teacher classroom, Haley, and she started coming into mine, and she would ask me questions like that, and they were tough to answer.
Yeah,
I mean, sometimes I knew exactly why. I was like, oh, let me tell you, I was feeling myself. And other times I was like, heck if I know.
Yeah.
But it made me think about like, oh, maybe this doesn't make sense. Maybe I should be doing it differently. But yeah, no, I just think like the more that we open our doors and we teach as a community, the better we're all going to be. And it takes away some of that anxiety that you feel, especially as a first, second, third year teacher, where you feel like everybody's got it figured out except me. And that's so far from the truth. You walk down the hall and you watch a 25-year teaching veteran, and they are going to have some awesome strategies, some awesome things in place, but you're also still going to see room for growth in them. And then it normalizes it that we all have places where we can be better.
Sydney, that is the best advice ever, I think.
Oh, wow.
just like you, that is where all of my growth has come, is by watching other teachers and asking questions and trying to figure out, can I take this little piece and add it to what I'm already doing? And so that is great advice. Teachers, totally do that tomorrow. Step into another teacher's classroom. One time I caught myself, and I was not feeling good about my teaching, and I caught myself during my planning period just like playing Candy Crush. I was just like,
yeah,
what am I doing?
You know what?
Totally
sometimes you need that too.
You do.
There's sometimes a moment for that. I don't want to knock them,
Yeah, but at the same time, I was just like, I could be learning right now. I could be getting better. And so that's what I did, is I emailed a couple of my colleagues and said, hey, tomorrow during my planning period, I was hoping to step in a couple of classrooms. Would it be okay if I stepped in? And they were more than willing. And so,
yeah,
perfect advice. Okay. Well, our hour is about up here, but I appreciate you so much for joining our podcast. If someone wanted to connect with you or learn more about what's going on, where could someone connect with you?
Sure. So I'm on Twitter at Sydney C. Jensen. I'm also on Instagram at Love Miss Jensen. And then I have a website, sydney-jensen.com. So any of those places, you can find all of my contact information.
Perfect. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Thanks, Sydney.
Thank you so much. It's fun.